Hello, and welcome to week 2. So this week's topic is getting to know your audience. So the questionnaire that you responded to at the end of week 1 really has to do with getting to know my audience. So this helps me get a feel for who you are as an individual and what your perspective might be as you move through this course. So this informs me of your experience, your place in the world, and it helps me acknowledge you as an individual, even though the Buddha taught that there is no such thing as self and individuals. We know that we like to be acknowledged as independent beings with specific experiences. You know, in the phenomenal world, the truth is that we do identify as people with specific experiences, perspectives, points of views, and it helps to feel as though you are being acknowledged as a thinking, living, breathing person with your scenarios, your specific needs, and experiences. So these questionnaires do help with gaining that. And as an educator, as a teacher, it helps me to have a feeling for who you are. So no koan here, just who are you? and this is an important thing to get to know. So the Buddha teaches in the Lotus Sutra that the most compassionate way to teach is, and the most effective way to teach, is to meet students where they are. And the question is, how do you know where your students are coming from? What do they already know? What is their perspective? What are they coming in with? What baggage might they have? We can't know those things unless we establish that connection with them. And sometimes, especially in an online learning environment like the one we have here, a questionnaire is the way to go. So this is this is one example of the Buddhist philosophy that is also embraced in education. So when I was going through my training as a public school teacher, it was really emphasized to us, meet your kids where they are. You know, don't ask them to be up here when maybe they're still down here with what their level of understanding is. That's not kind to ask them to reach for up here when, they don't even have the stepping stools to get up there. So it's the same idea. Meet your kids, meet your students where they are. So meet your learning group, the people who are in your learning groups, where they are. So from the perspective of students, whether they're children or adults, we respond best to feedback that we receive from someone we trust. And that trust is built through feeling as though we're being seen by the person who's teaching us. So how do you see someone? How do you make someone feel seen? You get to know them as an individual, where they are. And this trust is built through making connections and establishing that relationship, a trusting relationship. So consider the types of instructions that you as an individual, that you received, and the types of instructors that you have had, and who are the people that you learned the best from. How well did you know those people? Do you think that they knew you well? And when I'm talking about learning, I'm talking about, the academic up here learning, but I'm also thinking about that learning that happens that is not all just up here, but also the embodied learning experience. Who were the people that you learned best from? And why might it be important for you to get to know the individuals that you are working with in your learning groups? So those are some questions that you kind of want to think about. Why should I get to know these people? What is important? What am I asking them to trust me with? What types of, information are they having to share with me? Or are they going to want to share with me? How is someone going to be comfortable closing their eyes and meditating silently for 15 minutes with me if they don't know who I am, and then share my thoughts afterwards. Those types of things happen only when we are comfortable with the people that we are with. The other topic that was spoken about that you should have hopefully read and watched your videos about is culturally responsive teaching. So this is mentioned in the first article that was assigned. So culturally responsive teaching does tie in with the idea of making connections with your students, with the learners in your groups. So if you haven't read this article yet, I encourage you to, again, pause the video and go read the article, because I won't be going through it in detail. I'll just be explaining why this is an important thing to consider as you are relating to your students and conducting your learning groups. So the idea is that cultures that our students come from play a very important role in how they view the world, and it's important in how we view the world too. So we know this through the teachings that we receive in our practice as well. So we often refer to this as conditioning. So what are the conditions that influence how we view the events that take place in the world, the people around us, the things that come up in life? We all have the filters that affect how it is we interpret the things that come up for us. And our culture that we grow up in is part of this conditioning. So this can be anything from our home lives, the languages that we speak, our cultural background, our ethnic backgrounds, our religious beliefs. All of these serve as the filters that we use to interpret the world around us. So culturally responsive teaching asks us to take all of this into consideration as we instruct. And it matters if the teacher is white and the students are not. It matters that we as instructors take the lead in showing our students that we value their experiences and their backgrounds. So if we take a look at the 4 components of culturally responsive teaching, we've got affirmation. Okay, so this affirmation, as described in the article, was, I recognize and accept you as you are. I understand and nurture your multiple identities, and none of these aspects of you are in conflict with me. So this is something that is addressed in Buddhism. It points directly to the idea of interconnectedness, and that idea that we're not separate, and while we each have our own experiences that we go through in the phenomenal world, we are not separate. We are connected together through this greater experience of life. However, it is important to point out that the statements such as I don't see color are not useful in this context, and this can be a touchy subject. So I hope that you are able to approach this with an open heart and an open mind, because I think a lot of people still operate under the notion that I don't see color is a helpful approach. But it's not, and I will explain why. So whether you're talking about public classrooms or in the meditation hall, not seeing color and statements like those serve as what we call erasure. So it is a not acknowledging of an individual's experience in society, in culture, in the world. So people have very lived, very real experiences that are influenced by their color. And anyone saying, I don't see color, is saying, I don't see your experience. And it serves to shut down that experience, those experiences that people have. It's important to know that the part of the affirmation comes when we move towards validation. So affirmation is validating an individual's experience and their place in the world that is influenced by the color of their skin, by their gender or gender identity, by their sexual orientation, by religion, whether they speak English in an English-speaking country or not, etc. So affirmation is not, I don't see color, I don't see you as different. It is, I see you with all of those things as part of your experience. So affirmation is an important part of culturally responsive teaching. Validation. So validate students' experience of the world by acknowledging the socio-political context we live in, and that touches into a little bit of what I was talking about in affirmation. Teach the truth about power, politics, history, and the context in developmentally appropriate ways. So that part of the quote from the article really is pointing to young learners. Most of us work with adult learners, so developmentally appropriate ways, we can assume that most of the people we are working with are adult, mature people who have an understanding of life. And we use these issues as tools of instruction and discourse. So this is something that requires some skill, and it's not necessarily an easy and something that you're going to get right away. Maybe some of you already do this, and that would be great. But I know that for myself, truth be told, this wasn't something that came naturally to me because I was taught by people who didn't really practice some of these things. So for me to come into this took some effort and took some practice to do, and it's still something that I'm still currently working on, if I'm going to be honest. So it does require some skill to do. And as priests, we have learned the importance of responding to correct situation, relationship, and function in a given situation, and hopefully this can help inform what we do and how we do it. Clearly, we don't need to walk around saying, I validate you as a woman, 50% of the population, marginalized through receiving unequal pay and misogynistic political policies and cultural attitudes. So that said, when an opportunity presents itself to acknowledge some of our students' place in a given topic that naturally comes up, it is very important to do so. So for example, when I teach my students about how French arrived in Africa and in the Caribbean islands, etc., I also make sure that we talk about things like colonization and how French arrived in those places. We also always talk about how not just how people in those countries, in those places were affected in a negative way, how they were oppressed. We also talk about how they rose up and how they have grown out of that, and some of the resistances that have taken place to overthrow some of the European rule that has taken place there, and also some of the beautiful things that people were able to make to kind of step out of those roles as, downtrodden people. So we do things like listen to music, look at art, and talk about what they're saying, because a lot of those pieces of art and music address the issue of rising up and being strong and being beautiful, etc. So we celebrate the strengths. We acknowledge the history, but we celebrate the strengths. In the spring, we have something called Manie Musicale, which just means music mania, and it's always coincides with March Madness. And it is an activity that we do that spans like 8 weeks or something like that. And we listen to French music from around music by French-speaking artists from around the world, and it gives students an opportunity to have these conversations and then see what it is that artists do from different parts of the French-speaking world. And it is really amazing to see the change in students' perspective. And I have students who come from, who have family who live in places like Morocco, Lebanon, countries in Africa, and some of them are French-speaking relatives. And when they see those artists represented singing in French, English, and Arabic, and really celebrating their culture, their heritage. They get to see French in context of the cultures. They get to make connections, real world, real life, like they're alive today, connections with the French language and French speaking culture. And it is really a beautiful, amazing thing. I can physically see the change in demeanor of my students when we cover that part of our units of the course. And that's part of culturally responsive teaching, is helping students make these connections that help them see this is part of me and who I am. Cognition. So using students' culture as a reference point for helping them understand concepts. This is where learning theory, neuroscience, and culturally responsive teaching all meet up. So we aren't going to cover neuroscience. I had to when I was going through my training as a public school teacher, but I'm not going to make you do it. So basically, this can be tricky, and it really requires us to really get to know our students, and that's where our questionnaires that help us really get to know our students helps, and having those one-on-one conversations with them so that we really develop our connection to them also helps. So I can give an example of a student of mine who is hard of hearing. Still has a cochlear implant, and he was part of deaf culture, even though he wasn't really deaf for a long time. I don't think he really used sign language, but he was considered to be part of, deaf culture. So it really helped me to be able to connect with him on that level, understanding what his needs were as a hard of hearing individual, and talk about what his needs were when I was talking to him about, okay, so what can I do to help with developing your listening ability in French? What are some of the tools that we can use to help facilitate this? So his explaining to me that he would need things like videos with subtitles in French, that he can make the connection between what he was hearing through the help of his implant and what the words look like, so that he could develop those cognitive connections between those two things. Now, that's not something that I would offer a lot of other students, but I did anyway because he was in the classroom. And ultimately, I found that it helped them too. So it actually ended up helping me develop a new way to teach my students, all of them, not just one student who has the implant. Processing. Help students hold on to it, as in the information. Learn about neuroscience of information processing to support students in internalizing content to the level of automaticity. Call and response, music, movement, and storytelling all are culturally relevant ways to create neural pathways. So this last bit, like I mentioned, is a little less important for us, as there are fundamental differences between teaching students who are younger and teaching adults, which is something that will also be addressed in a future lesson. Younger students who are attending elementary and secondary schools are obligated to be there, and that changes how they receive information and how we deliver information in a way that is palatable to them. Most of the people that we work with as priests, we will be working with adults who are there because they want to be. They're there of their own volition. They are willing participants in this exchange of information. So they're also at a different place in life in terms of brain development, and I guess this is where the neuroscience comes in a little bit. It's not really necessary to know the fine details of brain development for our purposes, just that we are in a place, adults are in a place where they are just cognitively, in terms of learning, in a different place than children are. So this is a little less important for us. So basically, in the end, culturally responsive teaching can feel daunting. It can feel like a big job, especially if we approach it through the expectation, if we think that the expectation is for us to have a complete understanding of all the cultures around the world and all the situations of people who don't look like us. And this is not at all what anyone is expecting of any of us, public school teachers and priests alike. So the focus is commit to knowing who your students are. Commit to knowing what they are walking into your learning spaces with, and know them well. It's okay to ask your students questions. I just gave an example of my talking with my hard of hearing student with the cochlear implant so that I could better meet his needs. What is it in deaf culture that you do in order to make connection between what you hear and what you are learning? Whether it's in English or in French, the process is really similar. It's the same. So what is it that I can provide for you? It's okay to have those conversations as long as you are doing it in a thoughtful, compassionate way. The idea is simply to let ourselves learn as much about them as we want to know about ourselves in the course that we're teaching. So the idea is just to be very sincere and earnest and focus on correct situation, relationship, and function. It sounds easy, I suppose, but it does take some practice, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as we are keeping in mind that we're all human, and most people are quite forgiving. Especially when they can see that we are being earnest in our efforts to give them what it is that they need. So that concludes today's lesson, or this week's lesson. I will see you next week for week 3.